All right. All right. So we're going to continue. That's much better. I was a little loud there at first, wasn't I? um, we're going to continue talking about the real Christmas story, and if you were, well, I think most of everyone was here last week, but just to reconnect and kind of look at last week a little bit, we talked about kind of the real setting, right? You know, a lot of times growing up as kids, we see the settings of the kids, you know, and it's like, oh, it's all, everything's pretty and everything's glamorous, and even the stable and barn they were born into was picture perfect and clean and all this, and it wasn't quite as we see it. So we're going to continue kind of in that same vein, and so you know we look at the real location and kind of what it really looked like and what we see. And so the idea is, you know, it wasn't that everything, you know, looking beautiful and looking great and everything that we see there. And so we kind of looked at, and so what I want to look like at this week is, you know, the real struggle. So we looked at the real location, the real Bethlehem, the, you know, area that he was born to, but I want to look at the real struggle that he was born into as well. Not and the three areas I'm going to try to focus around today is going to be Mary's struggle, Joseph's struggle, and then the struggle of Israel, that they're, you know, what they were going through, and see the world, the struggle of the world that that Jesus came into. And I don't think it's any different than a lot of the struggles we see today. You know, it's a different time, different generation, but I don't think that, you know, we have any new or different struggles than what they had. Then in any case, they may have had a little worse off than we did if you look at a lot of the culture and a lot of things they struggled with. And so, but the first one I want to look at is Mary's struggle, right? And we'll start off, we're going to be in Luke 1, 26 through 38. So I'll read this real quick and we'll look at the struggle of Mary that she had. So starting in Luke 1, verse 26. In the sixth month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a virgin named Mary. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Gabriel appeared to her and said, "Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you." Confused and disturbed, Mary tried to think what the angel could mean. "Don't be afraid, Mary," the angel told her, "for you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and he will reign over Israel forever. His kingdom will never end." Mary asked the angel, "But how can this be? Or how can this happen? I am a virgin." And the angel replied, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the baby to be born will be holy and will be called the Son of God. What's more, your relative Elizabeth has become pregnant in her old age. People used to say she was barren, but she has conceived a son and is now in her 6th month. For the word of God will never fail." And then we see the end of this. Mary responded, "I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true." And then the agent left her. And so we see Mary's struggle here, and I think in the end, I love the ending of this verse. We see Mary's faith, because the thing we have to realize is that Mary was a teenager. Most scholars believe anywhere from the age of 13 to 16. We don't know exactly how old she would have been, but typically in that culture, in that time frame, that was the time when people pledged to each other. They would have been pledged to be married, that kind of stuff, which we're going to see and talk about with Joseph. So she was a teenage girl. She was engaged. Now, it's different. Engagements then were different than the way we think of engagements now. Like if I'm, you know, when me and Helen got engaged, it's, hey, we're planning on getting married. Whenever you got engaged back in this day, it was almost like being married, right, before the wedding. It was very a lot of legal stuff with it. It was very much it was legally binding. It was kind of one of these things that, you know, you had already agreed to get married, and so like it was more of a transaction than like what we have today. And so when you have an engagement like that, right, it's announced, everyone knows it. You know, and Nazareth wasn't a huge town, so everyone would have kind of known everyone And in areas like this, and well, we know most of y'all have grown up in a small town or small town atmosphere. All of a sudden, she's suddenly pregnant, and it's not by Joseph, right? And so Mary's running around saying, "Oh well, an angel visited me, and the baby's from God," right? and so you can imagine how well that went over. If you thought today, if that happened were to happen today, I don't think very many people are going to believe them. And what's interesting, the Bible doesn't really go into kind of the backstory of that a lot. Like, we don't see a lot of what Mary would have gone through because of that. I mean, it wouldn't have been a secret, obviously. I mean, maybe for the first few months they could have kept that hidden, but it wasn't one of those things that they would have been able to keep hidden, especially in a smaller town. And so, what did this like? So we look at it and see what this meant for her potentially, right? In that, especially in that culture, it would have been shamed for it, right? Because if she's pregnant and it's not Joseph's, then the ultimate conclusion is what everyone else is going to think, because you had we all know what small town gossip is like, and we've seen it in maybe even in large town gossip, and so she could have been, I mean, there could have been social isolation. There could have been a lot of things that happened because of this. And so I think the biggest thing is, and I think it's something that we kind of hit at and think today is, well, what are people going to think, right? We care a lot about people's opinions, even if we say we don't. Like we do. We care what people think a lot of times. And so that's something that she would have done. So there would have been a struggle there for Mary. We kind of sometimes, and different religions and different denominations put Mary on a different pedestal. Mary wasn't perfect, and so she would have been human. She would have been sinful, just like us, and so she would have struggled with a lot of the same things that we struggle with. And so I commend her, with her faith. I can't imagine what it'd be like for an angel just to pop in and be like, "Hey, guess what? You're having God's son." Good luck with that, and and her response to be just, okay, if it's God's will, then let's do it. And so no questions really. I mean, the only question is, how's that going to happen? And I think we all would have asked that question, but no, and so we see her great faith, and so I think that the key points and a lot of the spiritual points we can see here, especially for her, is God's greatest work often starts in the most inconvenient places. All right, a lot of times we think everything has to be perfect and set up and we got to make everything look right, and so all of a sudden, and a lot of times if you look, God does his best work out of the inconveniences in the most inconvenient places, and he interrupts her plans with a purpose. And so he may interrupt your plans. He may interrupt our plans for a purpose, right? We may not like it. It may not be what we wanted to do. I mean, I don't think Mary was going around thinking, "Hey, I'm wondering if I'll ever have be the mother to the Son of God." I don't think that was on her to-do list, her checklist. And so it's interesting. This is probably not the moment. This is probably not something that she would have chosen, but it's what the moment that God chose to use, and to use her in that. And so I think what we can look at there is when your life doesn't feel right, or I'm sorry, where in your life now doesn't feel right, just like it got interrupted, and she got interrupted in that. And so when the life gets interrupted, I don't do well with that. I don't know how many of y'all do well with that. Like if I got plans and if I got things laid out, and it's like, we're going to do this, and this, and if that gets interrupted or messed up, it ruins my whole day. I'll be going to town, I'll be driving, it's like, okay, I got to turn right here, I got to turn right here, and I got, and if that gets interrupted, and it just throws my whole day off, and just the way I work. And so sometimes we have to learn that God works best sometimes in those interruptions. We may not like them, we may not look forward to them, but he truly does work best in those. Do y'all have that? Anyone have a situation like that where it just right now it feels like your whole life's just being interrupted? Go ahead. So much, yeah. Yeah, and interruptions never feel convenient. It's not you hardly ever you're like, oh well, I'm glad. It's like I'm good. Yeah, yeah, pops up. And so it's interesting to see how God works in the struggle, and that's the thing. The theme of the Bible almost is God working in the struggle of mankind. Right, and never do we see God show up and be like, oh well, you have everything together. Let me, let's do this. Usually it's I'm going to make things a lot harder on you so you can fulfill my purpose. And we see that with, you look at from Abraham to Noah to all the way through the Old Testament to Paul. Everyone, we kind of talked about that a little bit last week. We don't see it where it's like, oh, this is going to be wonderful and great for you in the end, but I'm still going to fulfill my purpose through you. And I think that's the wonderful thing. From the human standpoint of it, we see these things that happen, and from an earthly standpoint, it's like, oh, this is horrible. But from a heavenly standpoint, and once we get through the other side of it and see it, I think it's a much more rejoiceful thing that we see there. And then so the other thing we see too is Joseph's struggle, and this is the thing for me is Mary had faith, right? An angel appeared to her. And it's like, okay, well, what God wants, let's do that. But I think we have to give, sometimes I think not enough credit's given to Joseph, because of the situation and everything that we have. We'll read this and then we'll kind of look at it a little bit. And so in Matthew 1, verses 18 through 25, it says, this is how Jesus the Messiah was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, to whom she was engaged, was a righteous man and did not want to disgrace her publicly, so he decided to break the engagement quietly. As he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Joseph, son of David, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit. And she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary as his wife, but he did not have sexual relations with her until she was born, and Joseph named him Jesus. And so you can imagine from Joseph's standpoint that more than likely at first he felt betrayed, right? Mary's like, hey, I'm pregnant. It's not yours, obviously, it's God's. And I don't know how many men are going to believe that. Like, okay, sure. And so I'm sure, while he was going to, obviously he would have been hurt. Obviously he would have been blindsided, right? This was not, even in that day, as maybe as spiritual as whatever they may have been, you're still not going to believe a story like that. And so you have to give Joseph credit here, because I would think, like, if you came to me with a story like that, if you just come and said, hey, I'm pregnant, whatever, like, all right, well, mistakes happen. But then to me, you start making up some story. Well, the child belongs to God, right? It's God, I didn't cheat. I didn't do anything. It's, to me, that would have made it would have been added, like pouring salt in the wound. Like, okay, what, you think I'm stupid, And so I think it shows his character that he was still going to divorce her quietly. Because in this day and age, I don't remember all the laws around this, but it was a very shameful thing, and he could have gone public with it. I don't know. I should have dug a little bit deeper. I don't know if stoning was an option for a situation like this. It may have been, but it definitely public persecution. Public shaming would have been on order for this. for a situation like this. Because like I talked about, an engagement back then was a legally binding thing. It wasn't just, hey, we're getting married. Everyone. It was a legal. It was usually agreement between families and that kind of stuff. And so, well, and that's where I'm going to say, like, but he was going to do that before. He was going to divorce her quietly before the angel came. And so that's where I give him some credit and say, hey, obviously he was a good guy, and had a good heart, because yeah, he was still going to divorce her. Then obviously the angel comes. This is what we see here, and that's where he obviously, again, I'm sure, and this is the thing with this, they had to have been confused, right? I mean, like, what in the world is going on here? It's like, okay, Mary, has this dream, and I'm sure, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure she told Joseph about the angel appearing to her, probably right as it happened, or right as soon as it happened, said, hey, this is what this guy said, and maybe Joseph's like, man, she's coming up with a good story to cover this. I don't know, but we don't get the whole background in there, but we do see enough to see that he was going to try to protect her and divorce her quietly, or separate her from her quietly, and go on. And obviously God didn't want that to happen, because he kind of helped cause the situation a little bit. And okay, she could have been stoned. Okay, I couldn't remember. I was thinking she could have. And so yeah, and so obviously then God, being who he is, went to Joseph and was like, hey, look, sent an angel and said, hey, look, you need to name this child Jesus. This is what's going to happen. He's going to be the savior of his people. And lets him know, right? Don't be afraid. It's from the Holy Spirit. His name's going to be Jesus. And so what I like about this is, in the note that I wrote down here, a lot of times, is that obedience usually begins in confusion, not in clarity. And I think that's where a lot of our faith is. Like, when we put faith in God, we don't have like full clarity most of the time at what's going to happen. What is this going to look like? How's this going to work out? But we put our faith in Christ, and he continues to bless us. And so Joseph obeyed before he saw how all this was going to work out. Mary obeyed before she saw how all this was going to work out. And that's what we're kind of called to. Is, and I struggle with this. I've talked about this before. Like, I don't like not having all the answers. I like knowing. I like knowing how. I like being able to plan ahead and see everything, see how it's all going to happen, and work through it. It's harder for me to just go forward and hope it all works out without having saying, I still kind of have my plan, but it's like, God, I want you to just tell me detail for detail what you want me to do, how you want this to work out, what do you want this to look like. And he doesn't work that way. A lot of times it's, this is what I want you to do. You'll make it to the other side. You'll make it through. And so sometimes obviously we struggle with that. And so, yes, yeah. I'm very type A, and Ellen's like, she just laughed. She's like, that's an understatement.
Look up type A.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it can be a struggle for me. Like, I mean, that's like, for type A people to let go, and just give control over to God or to anyone is hard. We like to be the ones that drive everywhere and do everything and kind of have that control. And so to just give everything over to God, for him to say, hey, I'm not going to tell you everything. I'm not going to tell you how it's all going to work out, but this is what I want you to do. That definitely can be a struggle. So where is God asking you to obey, even though the situation doesn't make sense? I was trying to think of something off that I had. I don't have I don't know. There's a lot of things sometimes. Kyle, go ahead. Yeah. 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 No, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's when you're relying on him for stuff like that, and him blessing you, and that can be hard. I'll be honest with you, like with a lot of times with like what we're doing with the church and stuff like that, there's times where I struggle with it. It's like, okay, what are we supposed to be doing here? What are we, what do you want us to do? Where are we, and a lot of times, again, that control thing, I've just got to let go and say, okay, whatever it's going to be, it'll be. You'll let us know, and I want all the answers. I want to be like, okay, tell me what you want us to do 3 years from now. Yeah, what do you want it to look like 3 years from now? What do you want us to do? And that's not always how he works, and so sometimes it kind of feels like you're just wandering around, trying to figure figure things out, and but mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah, it is, and it's hard. I remember when I got laid off when me and Helen we'd only been married what, a year or so, 2 years, you know, and we had no income coming in. And well, I said we had a little bit. We had unemployment, but unemployment was not much at all. And I think it was like I don't even think it was 50%. It was not very much. And so they gave us a little bit of money when we left, but it was like 4 months before I found another job in West Virginia. IT jobs weren't plentiful in West Virginia, and so, but I mean, we never went out without. I mean, people from the church helped out. I think I've told this story before. The one lady, what size check was it? $1,000 she wrote us a check for, or two? Yeah, 2,000. I mean, just come up and it's like, hey, I think y'all need this, and I was like, no, we can't take it. And she kind of got upset that we did. We're gonna. She was like, you're taking that money, and so yeah, I mean, it's amazing how you think you look back and it's like, well, there's no way we're going to be able to make it, and God provides, and God's there for you. And so to reach out, to leap out and make those decisions sometimes and just step out on faith. I mean, that wasn't really me stepping out on faith. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to quit my job. It was, hey, you no longer have a job, but you still just, hey, you know step out on faith with God, and He takes care of you despite of yourself a lot of times. And that's the wonderful thing, is that God does take care of us despite of ourselves, and us getting in our own ways so many times. See that. And so yeah, you had Mary's struggle. You see Mary's struggle. You see things, I think, from Mary's perspective, and then you see things from Joseph's perspective, and very human, very common. I mean, I don't think there's anything Mary asked one question basically. It's like, okay, well, how's this going to work? And this is okay, whatever. And Joseph had a few more questions, it seems like, and obviously. And so, but you see this in the end, even though they struggled with these things, even though they would have had doubts, I'm sure they had, all kinds of doubts. I sometimes wish you could kind of get the whole backstory of what everything kind of looked like, some of the conversations they had, and what it would have looked for them. But unfortunately, we don't see that. But I think we can just kind of put ourselves in their positions and think about the doubts and the wonders and like, what in the world, the confusion of what this is going to look like and happen. And then, the thing we're going to look at as well is, like, you would think too, if with God coming to you and saying, hey, you're going to have this baby, this is going to be the Son of God, you're probably thinking that, well, wow, this is quite going to work out really great for us, right? This is going to be, we're having God's son. Things are going to be great, and then you end up giving birth to him in a barn, right? It's like, we're not off to a good start with God's son here, and so you got to just look at from the human side of that, what that would be like, and I think we can relate to it. And then finally we see I think we see Israel struggle, and that's the thing I think we can look at with what Israel was going through. Go ahead, Kyle. Sorry. Well, I think, I mean, in a cultural sense or a legal sense, I think he was just considered his father no matter what. You know, I think it would have been a lot of trying to hard to explain to a lot of, you know, I'm not sure what the documents looked like back in that day, but he would have been listed as his legal father. You know, yeah, yeah, and I think yeah, definitely, you know, and for Mary it would have been a lot easier because obviously that was Mary's baby; it came from her, right? Joseph, it was more of adoption type thing. It's like, okay, it's not really my son, but you know, we're going to, I'm going to take him on as my son, and everything we can see from a biblical context, he did. Um, we don't see any they treated him any different, you know, anything like that. We see that he more than likely came up. And learn carpentry like his father did, and those kind of things, and so we don't see anything that would allude to anything different. So, but go ahead.
Imagine that kind of, it'd be hard to find a couple
Yeah,
in that. You know what I'm saying? Like God chose. It's like, oh, okay, Mary would be perfect. Joseph, he did.
yeah, yeah,
Like it's like they both, and then like Mary, like I said, Mary risked her life. I mean, it was,
yep,
Joseph could have, like you said, like ended the engagement, went on about his business, lived by her, whatever. But Mary faced stoning. Mary
yeah.
faced, all that. But to me, it was probably been like, okay, I've got Mary, and I can work with Joseph.
Yeah. Well, and I think that does speak to both of their. You know, we see that Mary. It says Mary found favor with God, obviously. So she would have been faithful. She would have been, a true faithful servant of God. And I think we see that with her response. Right? She had like one question and was like, okay, let it be done. Let His will be done. And so I think but like you said, I think from that side of it also, I think he saw Joseph's nature and Joseph, the type of person that Joseph was as well. And so obviously Joseph found favor with God. They both would have had to in order for that to work out and for him to know, okay, this is where this can happen. And also, I mean, I'm not getting into it here, but I mean, there's a lot of lineage stuff that had to line up too. They had to be from the house of David and from a certain town and all this kind of stuff for it to work out too. And so God knew what He was doing and all that. But it's still interesting. He chooses mankind, and still to this day chooses mankind to fulfill what He wants to happen. And gotta wonder sometimes why He does. But um, yeah, yeah. A little bit, and that's where that we talk about that a lot of time is it is that fine line of God being sovereign but still using like weaving things in between the free will, and I wonder I think there are some times too where God just says, okay, this is going to happen, and because He's sovereign and that doesn't take away anything from us, I don't think, but there's from our free will and different things like that. And on a side note, I won't go too deep into this, but someone made a good point the other day. I was listening to something, and it's like, we talk about free will and we talk about that things, but it's like, well, we talk about, well, we have free will, we're free to choose, we're free to do it. And it was like, he's like, how many times did you read in the Bible where you don't have free will? You're a slave. And it's like, and they're like, well, I have free will to choose or not. It's like, well, you do. You have free will to choose God, but if you don't choose God, you don't have any free will because you're a slave to sin. And I thought that was an interesting perspective of, it's like we kind of live in that naive bubble of, well, even if I don't choose God, I still have the free will to do what I want to do. And it's like, no, you're a slave to the human condition, to sin. So you're going to be, you may think you have the free will, but ultimately that's your master. And anyways, I know that's a side thing, but I thought that was an interesting point that was made there. And so, But yeah, it's interesting to see how God works his sovereignty inside the free will of mankind and how he makes things work out. And so
But Joseph wasn't possibly not a real man,
yeah,
because they have 12-year-olds married with 30 and 45-year-old men.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the culture in that day, I mean, and we kind of saw this in early America as well. It wasn't uncommon for someone who was 14, 15 years old to marry someone who was in their 20s or late 20s and stuff like that. And so that was a very common practice in them. And I think that's probably part of why we see that, Joseph, was no longer alive when Jesus was crucified, when his ministry started, because he was 30. And so there is a good possibility that Joseph was already older. And so, you have that 10, 15 year age difference. And well, I'm sorry, I say that a lot of scholars seem to think that Joseph probably wasn't alive during Jesus' ministry because there's no reference to him whatsoever. And so, and he told John to take care of to Mary, and so most scholars believe the reason he told her that is because Joseph was no longer alive. And so, but again, that's trying to fill in the blanks a little bit. We don't have any concrete evidence, but that's kind of filling in the blanks of the things that we will see. And yes, and life expectancy back then. So. Again, I know that's sidetrack stuff, but sometimes I like hitting those little things. Okay, so finally then we see Israel's struggle here and kind of some of the things that Israel is going through. And in Galatians 4, Paul writes, right, when he's writing, he says, but Galatians 4, verse 4 and 5, but when the right time came, God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law. God sent him to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law so that he could adopt us as his very own children. It kind of goes back to the thing we were talking about with freedom and slavery and being tied to the law and to the sinful nature. But the thing we see here with Israel at this time is that, Israel was going through a lot. Israel had gone through a lot. They've gone in and out of slavery, in and out of freedom, in and out of all these things. And so finally they're conquered. This time they're conquered by Rome. And so they're under a Roman oppression. We talked about this a little bit last week. They would have been heavily, heavily taxed. They had the other side of this that we see is how corrupt the religious leaders of the time were, right? And how they had gotten into just basically, and it was just religion. It was pharisaical, just very what we would consider works based. I know under the law a lot of the things that they had to do, but they were just so corrupt. And so not only did you have this economic pressure that was coming down on them from not only their own government, but the Roman government and all these things that were happening, you had all this division among the religious people, that was going on. And people at that time, they were spiritually hungry, right? They were. We see that. That's why Jesus, obtained so many followers, but they were just spiritually drained. Because they had basically, if you look at the way the high priest and all these people put all these rules on these people, if anyone's ever studied everything that they had to go through and do back in this time, it was 630 some laws, I think it was, that they had to abide by and be under and make sure that they did every single one of them. And you had the Pharisees and the religious leaders basically watching them and to make sure that they did. And so they were under this, right? This just extreme pressure from not only a government standpoint, economic standpoint, but also from a religious standpoint as well. And to just to make you understand too, it wasn't like in today's age where it's like, well, I'm not a Christian, I don't go to churches. That honestly kind of wasn't an option. If you were born into a Jewish household, then these are the things that you did. It was the religion was very intertwined with government, with everyday life. And so it wasn't, we have the government over here and my job over here and then religion over here. It was all intertwined in your everyday life from a governmental standpoint, a work standpoint, everything that you did was kind of based around that. And so they were longing for this Messiah, right? I think it had been, gosh, I can't remember if it was 300 or I can't remember if it was 300 or 600 years. Was it 300 years from the last time they had a prophet? I can't remember if it was 3 or 6. It was somewhere in that time frame of just quietness, where basically they hadn't heard from God, and they had killed off all their prophets, and all this thing. And so there was just this just deafening silence where they hadn't heard anything, and so they knew a Messiah was coming. They just didn't know when. It's been foretold, and so there are just basically centuries of waiting, generations of suffering, and I'm sure they were asking, and like we do as humans, where is God? Right? Where's God in all this? Where is he at? Why is he allowed Rome to overtake us? Why is he, why are the Pharisees, why are the religious leaders the way they are in that thing? And so more than likely the right time here looked like the wrong time. I always look back and I wonder, it's like, why did God choose exactly this time to send Jesus? And God knew exactly the right time. He knew exactly when it would be the perfect time. Because
but the Israelites, they were already in they weren't in captivity, but they it was similar.
Yeah, similar. Not like before, but yeah.
But
They were conquered for sure.
Jesus or not, it was the end without God. God had to intervene for
I think you're right.
it was at the very end. Rome was fixing to wipe them out.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we see that almost happen several times after the fact. And so definitely they were on the downhill side of being a powerful nation, in that time for sure. And yeah.
They had turned so far away from God. That's why he spoke to them, I believe.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
exactly say that, but I mean, that's what it means. The reason why he had to send
Yeah.
well,
Well, 100 years. Yeah. And that was the pattern you saw. They would be okay for a little while. I mean, and that's the interesting thing of the state of Israel before Christ is they spent more time being unfaithful to God than they did being faithful to God. I mean, every time they would get their act together, they would just fall out of it and for hundreds of years, and then they'd get conquered, and then they'd get right, and then it was a repeated pattern. And so they were really kind of on this repeated pattern again, and that's why they were conquered by Rome. And so, but for Christ, I mean, you think of the world that Christ came into here. For him, it was politically dangerous, economically, not the best time, crushing. It was spiritually dry. Very unstable socially from what he went to, and maybe that's why he needed to come at this time. For the crucifixion to happen, for all those things to happen. Maybe that's exactly what he needed to. And so the idea here, and I think the thing we have to learn, and that we see from all this, is God's timing rarely feels convenient, right? I know it doesn't for me because I'm very impatient, and so it's like I want to answer right away. It's like God. Okay, I pray for something. I should, hopefully he'll give me an answer within the hour, and sometimes it's days, if not weeks, if not years. And so God's timing is rarely convenient, but it's always intentional. God knows best, and that's the wonderful thing. We have to remember that God can see it all. He knows it all. He can see it all, and so he looks at it. And so what looks like chaos to us may be a perfect alignment or a perfect opportunity or for perfect timing for God to come into. And I think sometimes he just comes into the chaos to help calm down the chaos as well, and to bring it, but maybe sometimes to make it even more hectic and chaotic as well. But it's his timing, and he knows what works best. And so the idea here, I think, is if you feel like life is falling apart, it may actually be falling into place. And so I think that's the reality of what we see here. Because I'm sure if you saw, like, if you look at Mary's life, I'm sure she's felt like things were probably, man, this is crazy. Things are going crazy. Same thing with Joseph. And so I don't think they felt like, oh, well, everything, we got it all together. Everything's going to be great. Israel, you could see. And so, but God uses all that chaos, everything that's going on, all that struggle to help everything fall into place. And so I want us to see that's the reality, and the reality of the first Christmas was, it was chaotic. It was a lot of, just crazy things going on. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't tidy. It wasn't easy for everyone that was going on. A lot of people, especially the Israel people or Israelites, they were struggling. I'm sure Mary was probably emotionally overwhelmed. I mean, you think from an emotional standpoint, what she would have been going through. I'm sure Joseph was still very confused and very unsure, right? And because I don't know, I was thinking about this when I was studying on it. It's like, Mary had the angel show up to her, right? Joseph, it was in a dream. And so, how it was like, okay, that was a dream. Was that just me? Or, or was that, so I don't know. I'm sure there may be a little bit of being unsure there. And then you just have Israel had to have been, just the people of Israel had to have been discouraged. I mean, you think it just from not even a religious standpoint, but from as a country, can you imagine what it'd be like if someone came in and took over America, and occupied America and we were under their control? I mean, just imagine what that, just the stress and what that would have been like. And so, they were very discouraged. They were being oppressed. And so that's exactly when Jesus enters. This is when God's like, okay, this is the perfect time for me to send my son. And so God, that's the thing. God steps into the struggles, not after it's fixed, right? But right in the middle of it. And that's the best time for us to lean on God. So many times we think, oh, we got to get everything together. We got to get it fixed. We got to get it right. And then then God will show up or, and that's the wonderful thing is that typically, now that's not the way it works. He comes in the middle of all of it messed up. Typically when we've made it, a mess, and helps us, cleans it up. And so my question then is where is God in your struggle? Where is God at in your struggle? And I have 3 questions for you to think about. If you want to, we can discuss them if you got something to say around them. But these are 3 things I kind of want you to think about as we go through the week, right? Where do I feel uncertainty right now, in my life? Where do I feel uncertainty right now? Where am I trying to control something God is asking me to trust? And what step of obedience do I need to take even before I have all the answers? And so those are the kind of the 3 things I want us to think about, because I'm sure there was a lot of uncertainty for Mary and Joseph going into this. And I'm sure they tried to control some things, or tried to have some control over some things. And God was just, in the whole time, asking them, just trust me. It'll work out. And I'm sure they had to be, even to his birth, right? And we see his birth. You have to be wondering, like, as they were sitting there trying to find somewhere to stay in Bethlehem, like what's going on here? God was like, why? Well, you're not even going to give us somewhere to stay that's comfortable, or you're going to make us sleep in a barn. And so I'm sure there was a lot of questions, but you see, even with that they were obedient, and they took the step of obedience without having all the answers. And so I think that's they're a very good example of how we are to be. And so my bit of encouragement here is, you may not see all the pieces yet, but God is working. Mary didn't see it. Joseph didn't see it. Israel didn't see it. But God was doing more than you can imagine. And I think a lot of times we have to remember, even though we don't see what's happening, we don't know 100% sure how it's all going to work out, what everything's going to look like. In the end, God made it work out, and He can do more than we can imagine in the end, and we just have to put our faith and our trust in Him. So I think that's the interesting side of looking at the real story of Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the culture and the nation that He was born into and that He came into. And we see that struggle. We see what they went through and everything they were going through. So, anyone have anything else? Any questions? Any thoughts? Any comments? But just think about that. Think about the struggles. Think about that throughout the week, as you go through. And I want to have Kyle, if you don't mind, at this time, close us in prayer.